Welcome to my channel. Let me ask you a powerful question. What kind of man can spend 27 years in prison and still walk out without hatred? What kind of person suffers for decades and instead of revenge, chooses peace? Most people, after facing so much pain, would come out angry. They would want justice through revenge. They would want those who hurt them to suffer as well. But there was one man who chose a completely different path. That man was Nelson Mandela. This is not just the story of a leader. It is not only a story about politics or power. This is the story of a human being who changed the direction of an entire nation and inspired millions of people across the world. His life showed humanity something very rare, that courage is not only about fighting enemies. Sometimes, true courage is about forgiving them. But Mandela did not start his life as a famous hero. He was not born in a palace. He was not born with power or influence. He started his life as a simple boy in a small village in South Africa. Like many young people, he had dreams, questions, and hopes for the future. But as he grew up, he began to see something deeply unfair in his country. He saw millions of people treated differently just because of the color of their skin. He saw laws that separated families, limited opportunities, and silenced voices. These unfair laws were part of a harsh system called apartheid. Under this system, black South Africans were not allowed to vote, choose their leaders, or enjoy the same freedoms as white citizens. Their lives were controlled by strict rules that decided where they could live, work, and even travel. For many people, it felt like their future had already been decided for them. But Mandela believed something very powerful. No system of injustice can last forever if brave people stand up against it. His journey was filled with struggle, sacrifice, courage, and wisdom. From a quiet village, to becoming a young lawyer fighting unfair laws, to being hunted by the government, to spending nearly 3 decades inside a prison cell. Most people would have given up long before that. But Mandela never stopped believing in freedom. And then something extraordinary happened. The man who spent 27 years behind prison walls did not disappear from history. Instead, he came out stronger, wiser, and ready to lead his nation toward peace. The prisoner became the president. The man who once had no freedom helped bring freedom to millions. So how did one man change history? How did his ideas defeat injustice? And what lessons from his life can still guide us today? Stay with me, because today we will explore the powerful and inspiring story of Nelson Mandela, and how he changed the world forever. Chapter 1. The world Mandela was born into. To understand how Nelson Mandela changed the world, we must first understand the world he was born into. Because Mandela's story is not just about one man. It is about a country, a system of injustice, and the courage of people who believed life could be different. The story begins in South Africa, a land known for its beautiful landscapes, diverse cultures, and many languages. Different communities lived there for generations, each with their own traditions, music, and stories. But during the early 20th century, South Africa was also a deeply divided country. At that time, the country was controlled by a political system called apartheid. Apartheid was not just a social problem. It was a powerful system of laws created by the government to separate people based on race. These laws controlled almost every part of life. Under apartheid, white citizens had most of the political power and economic opportunities. Black South Africans, who were the majority of the population, were treated very differently. They were forced to live in specific areas far away from cities. These places were often poor and lacked good schools, hospitals, and jobs. Black families could not freely choose where they wanted to live. They could not walk freely in many areas without special documents called passes. Police could stop them at any time and ask to see these papers. If they did not have them, they could be arrested immediately. Schools were also separated. White children went to well-funded schools with good resources. Black children often studied in overcrowded classrooms with very limited materials. The education system was designed to limit their opportunities and keep them in low-paying jobs. But perhaps the most painful part of apartheid was this: black citizens could not vote. They had no voice in choosing the leaders who made these laws. Imagine living in a country where the government controls your life, but you are not allowed to help choose that government. This was the reality for millions of people in South Africa. Into this world, a boy named Nelson Mandela was born in 1918. He was born in a small rural village called Mvetso. The village was quiet and surrounded by hills and rivers. Life there was simple, and people lived close to nature and tradition. As a child, Mandela spent his early days playing with other children in open fields, herding animals, and listening to the wisdom of elders in his community. In the evenings, older members of the village often gathered to tell stories about African history, leadership, and bravery. These stories talked about chiefs who protected their people and leaders who believed in fairness and justice. These early lessons quietly shaped the young Mandela's mind. Even though he was still a boy, he was learning about responsibility, dignity, and leadership. When Mandela grew older, he began attending school. Education opened a new world for him. He learned about history, politics, and the laws that governed his country. But as he continued his studies, he also began to notice something troubling. The opportunities available to white students were very different from those available to black students. Later, Mandela moved to a larger city to continue his education. This was a turning point in his life. In the city, he saw the harsh reality of apartheid more clearly than ever before. He saw police enforcing unfair laws. He saw families separated because of racial rules. He saw intelligent, hard-working people struggling simply because the system did not allow them to succeed. For the first time, the young student began asking serious questions. Why should one group of people have freedom while another group is controlled? Why should the color of someone's skin decide their future? Why should millions of citizens live without a voice? These questions slowly transformed Mandela from a quiet observer into someone who believed change was necessary. During this time, Mandela also studied law. Becoming a lawyer gave him a powerful tool, knowledge of the legal system. He believed that understanding the law could help him challenge injustice and defend people who were treated unfairly. This belief led him to join an important organization called the African National Congress, often known as the ANC. The ANC was one of the main groups fighting against apartheid and demanding equal rights for all South Africans. At first, Mandela believed that change could happen through peaceful protest, speeches, and legal action. He worked with other activists to organize meetings, encourage communities, and demand fairness. But the government did not listen. Instead, the authorities passed even harsher laws to control black citizens. Protests were often broken up by police. Activists were watched, arrested, and sometimes imprisoned. Fear began spreading across communities. Mandela realized something deeply important during this time. The fight for justice would not be easy. It would not be quick. And it would definitely not be safe. The young lawyer who once believed the law alone could fix the system now saw the reality more clearly. Changing such a powerful system would require courage, sacrifice, and a willingness to face serious consequences. This realization marked a major turning point in Mandela's life. The quiet boy from Wetso was beginning to transform into a leader who would challenge one of the most powerful systems of racial injustice in the world. But standing up against such a system always has a price. And soon, Mandela would discover just how high that price could be. Because the path he was choosing would eventually lead him to courtrooms, prison cells, and a struggle that would last decades. The question now was no longer whether Mandela believed in justice. The real question was this: how far was he willing to go to fight for it? Chapter 2: The Price of Resistance. As the years passed, Nelson Mandela was no longer just a young student learning about injustice. He had become an activist, a lawyer, and a powerful voice speaking against the unfair system that controlled the lives of millions in South Africa. His journey from a quiet village boy to a determined leader had already begun. But the path he chose was dangerous, and the price of resistance would soon become very real. Mandela worked closely with the African National Congress, often called the ANC. This organization had one clear mission: to fight against apartheid and demand equal rights for all citizens, no matter the color of their skin. Mandela and his colleagues traveled across communities, speaking to workers, students, and families. They organized meetings, protests, and campaigns to encourage people to stand up for their dignity. Mandela believed deeply in the power of peaceful protest. He believed that if enough people demanded justice calmly and courageously, the government would eventually be forced to change its laws. At rallies and gatherings, Mandela spoke about freedom, equality, and human dignity. His words gave hope to many people who had lived their entire lives under discrimination. But the government did not welcome these voices of change. Instead of listening, the authorities responded with fear and force. Police began monitoring activists closely. Meetings were broken up. Protest leaders were arrested. Many people were beaten, threatened, or forced into silence. The government wanted to send a clear message: anyone who challenged the system would pay a heavy price. Despite these dangers, the protests continued. Communities were growing more determined to demand justice. Then, one tragic day changed everything. In 1960, a peaceful protest took place in a town called Sharpeville. Thousands of people had gathered to protest against the past laws that controlled where black citizens could travel and work. The protesters were unarmed. They stood together peacefully, hoping their voices would finally be heard. But the situation quickly turned into tragedy. Police officers opened fire on the crowd. This event became known as the Sharpeville Massacre. Dozens of people were killed, and many more were injured. The images and stories of that day shocked the entire country and spread across the world. For many activists, including Mandela, this moment felt like a painful awakening. Mandela realized something important and difficult. Peaceful protest alone might not be enough to defeat such a powerful and violent system. This realization changed the direction of the struggle. Soon after, the government banned the African National Congress and declared it illegal. Many leaders were forced to go into hiding to avoid arrest. Mandela himself made a dramatic decision. Instead of stopping his work, he chose to continue the fight secretly. Mandela went underground. For months, he moved from place to place, avoiding police and continuing to organize resistance movements. Because he traveled secretly and appeared suddenly at meetings, newspapers began calling him the Black Pimpernel, comparing him to a mysterious hero who could never be caught. But the government was determined to find him. Police launched a nationwide search for Nelson Mandela. Roadblocks were set up. Informants were used. His photograph appeared in newspapers as one of the most wanted men in the country. Finally, in 1962, Mandela was captured and arrested. For the government, this was a victory. For many people fighting against apartheid, it was a moment of deep fear. Their most powerful voice was now in prison. But the story was far from over. Mandela was soon placed on trial in a historic court case known as the Rivonia trial. The government accused Mandela and other activists of planning sabotage against the state. The charges were extremely serious, and many people believed the court might sentence him to death. The entire world began watching closely. During the trial, Mandela was given the chance to speak in his own defense. What happened next became one of the most powerful moments in modern history. Instead of begging for mercy, Mandela used the courtroom to explain why he had fought against apartheid. He spoke calmly and clearly about justice, equality, and the dream of a country where people of all races could live together with dignity. Near the end of his speech, Mandela said words that shocked the courtroom and inspired millions of people around the world. He declared that he had fought against white domination and against black domination. He said he believed in the ideal of a democratic and free society where all people could live together in harmony. And then he spoke the words that would echo through history. He said this was an ideal he hoped to live for, but if necessary, it was an ideal he was prepared to die for. The courtroom fell silent. Those words were not just a defense. They were a declaration of courage. In 1964, the court delivered its decision. Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was taken to a harsh prison located on an island off the coast of South Africa, a place called Robben Island. Behind those prison walls, Mandela would spend year after year in a small cell. The government believed that once Mandela was locked away, his voice would disappear. They believed the movement would slowly lose its strength. For many people outside the prison, it felt like the struggle had lost its strongest leader. The man who had once spoken to crowds, inspired communities, and challenged the government was now hidden from the world. His story seemed to end behind cold prison walls. But history was quietly preparing a different future. Because even though Mandela was now a prisoner, his ideas were about to travel far beyond the walls of Robben Island. And the world outside was beginning to listen. Chapter 3: The man who could not be silenced when the prison doors closed behind Nelson Mandela. Many people believed his story was over. The government of South Africa thought that if Mandela was locked away, the movement against apartheid would slowly fade away. Without its strongest leader, they believed the voices of resistance would become quiet. But they were wrong. Mandela was taken to a prison far from the mainland, a cold and isolated place called Robben Island. The island was surrounded by rough ocean waters, and the prison there was known for its harsh conditions. It was designed to break the spirit of political prisoners. Mandela's cell was extremely small. It was only a few steps wide. Inside the cell there was a thin sleeping mat on the floor, a small blanket, and a metal bucket used as a toilet. There was no bed, no comfort, and almost no privacy. Every day followed a strict routine controlled by prison guards. Prisoners woke up early in the morning and were sent to work for long hours in a stone quarry. The sun was strong, and the white dust from the stones reflected the light directly into their eyes. The work was physically exhausting, and the conditions were meant to weaken both the body and the mind. Food was limited and often poor in quality. Letters from family were rare. Visits were short and strictly monitored. The prison system was designed to isolate Mandela from the outside world and slowly erase his influence. But something unexpected happened inside those prison walls. Instead of losing hope, Nelson Mandela grew stronger in spirit. Mandela understood something very important. Even if the government controlled his body, they could not control his mind. He created a daily routine of discipline and learning. Mandela exercised regularly in his small cell to keep his body strong. He spent hours reading books and studying. He continued learning about law, politics, and history. Even in prison, he believed education was a powerful tool for freedom. Mandela also spent long hours talking with other prisoners. Many of them were activists who had also been arrested for fighting against apartheid. Together they discussed ideas, shared knowledge, and supported each other through difficult days. Over time, something remarkable happened. The prison that was meant to silence Mandela slowly became a place where leadership and wisdom grew stronger. Younger prisoners looked up to him. They respected his calm voice, his discipline, and his ability to stay hopeful even in dark moments. Mandela often reminded his fellow prisoners of an important truth: anger alone could not build a better future. If they wanted to create a fair society one day, they would need patience, wisdom, and unity. Inside Robben Island, Mandela became more than a prisoner. He became a symbol of dignity. Meanwhile, something powerful was happening outside the prison. Across the world, people were learning about the injustice of apartheid. Students, activists, and leaders in many countries began speaking out against the system. Protests were organized in cities far away from South Africa. Universities held demonstrations. Governments began discussing sanctions and political pressure. Human rights organizations started campaigns to expose the reality of apartheid to the world. One name began appearing again and again in newspapers, speeches, and protests: Nelson Mandela. Even though Mandela was behind prison walls, his name had become a global symbol of resistance and hope. Musicians wrote songs calling for his freedom. Students marched in the streets holding signs that said "Free Mandela." Political leaders spoke about him during international meetings. Around the world, people began to see Mandela as the face of the struggle for justice in South Africa. Year after year, international pressure on South Africa continued to grow. Many countries placed economic sanctions on the South African government, refusing to trade normally until apartheid ended. The government slowly began to realize that the world was watching. And then, after nearly 3 decades in prison, history reached a turning point. In 1990, the government of South Africa made a dramatic announcement. After 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela would finally be released. The moment Mandela walked out of prison became one of the most powerful images of the 20th century. Millions of people watched the event on television around the world. The man who had entered prison as a young activist with dark hair walked out with grey hair and a calm smile. But something even more powerful had changed. Mandela was no longer just a political prisoner. He had become a global symbol of courage, patience, and moral strength. People expected anger. After all, he had spent almost 3 decades behind bars. But Mandela surprised the world. Instead of calling for revenge, he called for peace. Instead of speaking with hatred, he spoke about reconciliation and unity. He told the people of South Africa that the country could only move forward if all races worked together to build a new future. This message shocked many people. Some expected a revolution filled with anger. Instead, Mandela spoke about forgiveness and cooperation. He understood something very important. Freedom would not last if the nation remained divided by hatred. As Mandela began meeting leaders, activists, and communities after his release, it became clear that he was preparing for something much bigger. After 27 years of silence behind prison walls, Mandela was ready to help guide an entire nation toward a new chapter of history. The country had been divided for generations. Now the world was watching to see whether Mandela could do something even more difficult than resisting injustice. Could he help unite a nation that had been separated for so long? The answer would soon shape the future of South Africa and inspire people across the world. Chapter 4: Changing a Nation and Inspiring the World. When Nelson Mandela walked out of prison after 27 years, the world celebrated. But inside South Africa, the situation was still very fragile and dangerous. The country had lived under the harsh system of apartheid for decades. Millions of people had suffered injustice, humiliation, and violence. Anger had grown over generations. Many people feared that the country might fall into chaos. Some believed there could be a civil war between different racial groups. Others believed that once black South Africans gained political power, revenge would follow. After so many years of pain, many expected the new future to be filled with anger. But Mandela believed something very different. He believed that true freedom was not just about replacing one group of leaders with another. True freedom meant building a country where every citizen could live with dignity and security. Mandela understood that if hatred continued, the nation would never truly heal. Instead of calling for revenge, Mandela spoke about forgiveness, cooperation, and unity. His message surprised many people around the world. After everything he had experienced in prison, he still believed that reconciliation was possible. One of the most important steps in this journey was Mandela's cooperation with the former President of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk. De Klerk had begun the process of ending apartheid laws and opening the door for democratic change. Mandela and de Klerk came from very different backgrounds, and in the past they had been political enemies. Yet Mandela believed that working together was the only way to guide the country toward peace. Through long negotiations, discussions, and careful leadership, the two leaders helped guide South Africa toward a historic transformation. Slowly, the laws of apartheid were removed. Political prisoners were released. Banned organizations were allowed to operate again. Then came one of the most important moments in the country's history. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election. For the first time ever, citizens of all races were allowed to vote. For decades, Black South Africans had been denied the right to choose their leaders. Now they finally had a voice in shaping their country's future. The day of the election was emotional and unforgettable. Across the country, millions of people stood in long lines outside voting stations. Some people waited for hours just to place their vote. Many elderly citizens came with tears in their eyes, knowing that for most of their lives they had never been allowed to participate in democracy. People from different backgrounds stood together in the same lines. Black citizens, white citizens, and people of mixed heritage all shared the same moment of hope. It was not just an election. It was a powerful symbol of a nation being reborn. When the results were finally announced, history was made. Nelson Mandela was elected as the first black president of South Africa. The man who had once been labeled a criminal and imprisoned for life was now the leader of the country. It was one of the most extraordinary transformations in modern history. But Mandela did not see the presidency as a victory over his former enemies. Instead, he saw it as a responsibility to unite the country. One of the most important steps he took as president was supporting the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This commission had a difficult but important mission: to help the nation face the painful truths of the past. During the apartheid years, many terrible acts had taken place. Families had been separated, activists had been imprisoned, and violence had affected communities across the country. Ignoring these events would not allow the nation to heal. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission allowed victims to share their stories openly. It also allowed those responsible for crimes to confess their actions. The goal was not simply punishment. The goal was understanding, accountability, and healing. This process was not easy. Many people carried deep pain. But Mandela believed that facing the truth was the only way the country could move forward without repeating the mistakes of the past. Mandela's leadership during this time amazed people around the world. Instead of creating a government based on revenge, he built a government focused on cooperation and rebuilding. He also took symbolic actions that helped unite the country. Mandela attended events with people from all communities. He encouraged national pride that included every citizen. One famous example was when he supported the national rugby team during the 1995 Rugby World Cup, showing that the country's future belonged to everyone. These actions helped slowly build trust among people who had once been separated by fear and anger. Over time, Nelson Mandela became more than just a national leader. He became a global symbol of courage, wisdom, and moral leadership. Leaders, students, and activists across the world studied his life. His message of forgiveness and justice inspired movements in many countries. Mandela showed that real strength is not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes the greatest strength is the ability to forgive and move forward. Even after leaving the presidency, Mandela continued working for peace, human rights, and global cooperation. His life reminded the world that leadership is not about power alone. It is about character, patience, and the courage to stand for what is right. The boy who once listened to stories in a small village had grown into one of the most respected leaders in human history. His journey, from Vetso to prison, and from prison to the presidency, proved something extraordinary. One person with courage can challenge injustice. One voice with truth can inspire millions. And one life, lived with dignity and purpose, can change the course of history forever. If this video helped you discover the powerful story of Nelson Mandela, if it helped you learn English through a real story of courage, sacrifice, patience, and leadership, then this channel is made for you. Here we learn English not only through grammar and vocabulary, but through real history, powerful ideas, and inspiring human stories. Because when you learn English through meaningful stories, the language becomes easier, deeper, and more memorable. So take one small step today. Subscribe to this channel so you can continue improving your English while learning about the people and events that shaped our world. Like this video if you believe that one brave voice can truly change history. And comment below. Tell me one lesson you learned from the life of Nelson Mandela. Was it courage, forgiveness, patience, or the power of never giving up? Your comment may inspire someone else who is watching this video. And always remember this: learning English is not just about words, rules, or sentences. It is about understanding the stories, ideas, and values that connect people across the world. And the story of Nelson Mandela is one the world will never forget.